Hello everyone and welcome back to part 2 of the World War II Mysterious Iceberg. We're just gonna cut to the chase and get into the tier, and if you want to follow along, the iceberg will be linked below. But with that out of the way, hey, thanks for watching. It means a lot. Starting tier 2, we have the Niihau incident, which occurred on December 7th, 1941 during the attack of Pearl Harbor. A Japanese pilot whose name I can't pronounce, this is it on screen. I'm going to refer to him as Bob. So Bob crash landed on the island of Niihau, one of the smallest in Hawaii, and he thought it was uninhabited, but it turns out there were actually about 100 or so people living on the island, most of which were native Hawaiians. Now, the natives didn't know anything about the actual attack on Pearl Harbor, but they knew the US and Japanese weren't exactly buddy-buddy. And so, yeah, they were confused about, why is this Japanese military pilot just crash landing on our island? They were mostly actually pretty chill about it. I mean, yeah, they took his gun and all his paperwork and everything. But ultimately, they were actually pretty nice to him. They even threw him a party. Well, that is until after they found out about Pearl Harbor. And that's when they detained the pilot and decided, you know what? We're going to wait for the island's owner to return from one of the big islands, so they can take Bob back to the Big Island and give him over to the proper authorities. Now, while most of the island's inhabitants were native Hawaiians, there were a few Japanese American immigrants living on the island, including Yoshi Harada and his wife Irene, who stayed with Bob and were kind of like a translator. Bob was able to convince the Haradas to help him hatch a plan to escape with the help of some of the other Japanese Americans who lived on the island, and during the escape attempt, they were able to capture a guy named Kalim, who they let go to have him help look for Bob's paperwork because, it was all a bunch of important documents and he just couldn't let the US have that. Instead of helping with the search for the paperwork, Kalim went and got his buddy Ben Khalil, a real Chad of a guy, right? He's the hero of this story. And together they hatched a plan to steal Bob's gun, but it didn't work. So that ended up with Ben and his wife getting captured. Ben was then for some reason let go to also find the guy that had Bob's paperwork. I mean, it didn't work the last time. I don't know why they tried it again. But again, Ben, being the Chad he is, decided he was going to go back to the pilot, and a fight broke out between Ben and Ella fighting Bob and the Japanese Americans, during which Ben got shot 3 times, but he was still able to pick Bob up, throw him at a stone wall, and by the end of the fight ended with Ben and Ella killing the pilot, after which Yoshi Harada unalived himself. Ben did survive his injuries, and after help came, Yoshi's wife Irene was sentenced to prison for, I think she got sentenced for 5 years. Weirdly enough, she never got charged with treason, and Bob's other supporter, Ishii, was sent to an internment camp in the continental United States. While this incident isn't really that talked about that often, it's usually cited as the major reason for the start of the US's Japanese internment camps. Mostly, it was propagated to the idea of, look how quickly these Japanese people, betrayed the US and went to go help a Japanese pilot. We can't trust any of them, which wasn't entirely the case. In fact, I would say that's widely not true, especially since a few years after the war, Irene was actually interviewed and asked why they helped Bob, and her response was, "We felt bad for him." She said that she knew that, he was going to die if he was captured by the US, and she would much rather give him a fighting chance back with the Japanese government instead of throwing him to certain death with our government. So yeah, a Japanese pilot landed off the coast of Hawaii and got the shit kicked out of him by some Hawaiians because, they ain't nothing to fuck with. The Battle of Castle Itter is probably the only time you can say the Germans were the good guys during World War II. The battle happened in Austria 2 days before Germany officially surrendered, and while the majority of the German army had just abandoned the local town, allowing the Austrian resistance and some French prisoners in the Castle Itter to be set free and just kind of take control of the area. While all that was happening and the Austrian resistance did have control of the region, there was a small force of German troops being left in the area that were led by Major Joseph Gangel. Gangel knew that the war was over, and he kept his men in the area to protect the locals and to help the Austrian resistance kind of, have a peaceful transition from German occupation to Austria being free again, going back to doing their own thing. Remember that Gangel was like the guy helping the Austrians. But the biggest reason why Gangel left his troops in the area was because he knew that there were small pockets of SS troops in the area that refused to accept that Germany had lost the war, and they were just kind of randomly attacking people who decided to fly Austrian flags or white flags to show that they were surrendering. And while all this was going on, a cook at Castle Itter managed to make contact with US forces in the area, who then sent out some, they sent some troops to help defend the castle from the SS, because they knew that, like, hey, they're going to try to retake this castle because it's a huge symbolic win for the region. And, a fight broke out, and it was basically the only time during the war that the US Army, the German Army, some French dudes, and a bunch of pissed off Austrians joined forces to kick Nazi ass. This is also one of those topics that require its own video to go into depth, but it's actually a really interesting story, and I'd highly recommend you read more of it. Flight 19 was a training flight for US Navy pilots just off the coast of Florida, where 5 planes and 14 crewmen seemingly vanished from thin air. On December 5th, 1945, Lieutenant Charles Taylor took flight students out in 5 torpedo bombers, also known as Flight 19. They took off from the Naval Air Station in Fort Lauderdale to just outside the Bahamas in order to get training pilots experience in navigation and actually dropping torpedoes. The actual training scenario was pretty cut and dry and a very common one done. All the pilots were supposed to do was fly east to their range, drop bombs, fly north to get navigation experiment, and then west back to Florida. At some point during the navigation section of the training, Taylor reported over the radio that both of his compasses had gone out and he thought he was flying over the Florida Keys, so they were lost over the ocean. The Keys thing is the weirdest part to me because, one, they were supposed to be flying over here in this general section, and they reached the range, and the Florida Keys are all the way over here. Not to mention there was an active naval air base in the Florida Keys at the time, so if you really thought that you were in the Keys, why not just land, refuel, and get your bearings, or, fix your compi? Believing they were over the Keys, Lieutenant Taylor radioed in he was taking the flight east, hoping to get back over mainland Florida. To which one of the students also radioed in, "Damn it, if we just fly west, we would get home, head west, damn it." Also, why none of the students broke formation and flew west is unknown, because as far as we know, they all had compasses in their planes too, and they were working just fine. Just before 6 p.m., Lieutenant Taylor reported that the flight had shifted course west and were going to keep heading west until they ran out of fuel. About 15 minutes after that, Taylor said they didn't go far enough east and should just turn around. And then by 6:20 p.m., the sun had set and bad weather was coming in. Lieutenant Taylor's last message received stated, "All planes close up tight, we'll have to ditch unless landfall. When the first plane drops below 10 gallons, we all go down together." And members of Flight 19 were never seen or heard from again. There's a lot of speculation as to what exactly happened while Lieutenant Taylor was a new instructor at the flight school. He was by no means a novice pilot. He flew missions during World War II, he had roughly 20,000 flight hours or so logged, so he should have known what he was doing. There's also the question on the students. They knew all they had to do was go west, and there is the theory that they didn't break formation out of fear of being reprimanded and getting punished, kicked out of school or whatever. But I'm pretty sure that they would have all had the mindset of, I'll get yelled at if it means I'm not going to die or risk crashing in the ocean. There's also the question of, why did Lieutenant Taylor think he was flying over the Florida Keys? Their flight plan would have taken them nowhere near that region. This whole situation has led to a lot of speculation and theories, from the most logical being that, they just got lost and ran out of fuel and crashed. Others are aliens and even being sucked into the Bermuda Triangle, since part of their flight plan did take them into it. I don't know, but what I do know is initially after this incident happened, Lieutenant Taylor did receive basically all the blame. Everything was put on him without him being able to defend himself, because obviously he was presumed dead. But thankfully over the last few years they've kind of reworded everything to, not blame him, because you can't really blame him for flying in a region he doesn't know with no navigation. So there's that much going, at least. I honestly couldn't find much on the Mystery Division, aside from the Army's 12th Armored Division receiving it as a nickname when they were temporarily under Patton when they crossed the Rhine. and that's about it. Up next is a man named Jean Moulin and the question of who betrayed him. Jean was the first president of the French Resistance, a position he held for only 2 months before being captured and killed by the Gestapo, but no one knows who turned him in or why. What happened was, on June 21st, 1943, Jean and several other high-ranking members of the French Resistance were arrested in the city of Lyon during a meeting. The finger has been pointed in several different directions, but there has never been any evidence to support any of these accusations. Most of these fingers were pointed at a man named René Hardy, who was arrested with Jean, and people suspect him due to the fact that René was either let go or able to flee. No one really knows which, but the point is he didn't end up in a prison. But post-war, René did stand trial twice for the betrayal, but he was acquitted both times due to lack of evidence. There's also accusations of communists turning him in. There's no evidence or names named or anything like that. It's just the damn commies did it. The finger's also been pointed at a man named Raymond Arbach, another leader in the French Resistance, who that finger was pointed by a man named Klaus Barbie, who oversaw the Gestapo in Lyon, was the one that kind of pointed the finger at Raymond, and that was all while he was on his deathbed, and a book was even going to be written detailing the whole situation by a man named Gerard Chauvet. But it never came out because Chauvet got sued for defamation and lost. So if you ask me, it was Arbach, because if the guy who oversaw the Gestapo and led the arrest said he was tipped off by him, and he took the guy who was going to publish the evidence in favor of it being Arbach to court, yeah, you're not going to do something like that unless you got something to hide. Hans Kimmler was a German engineer who oversaw several secret weapon projects during the war, including the V2 rocket, and like so many others, in May of '45, he just vanished off the face of the earth. His last known location was a town in Bavaria that I can't pronounce the name of, in late April '45, and there are several conflicting reports on what happened to him after the Allies showed up there. It's known that he fled Bavaria with intentions of going to Prague, but no one knows where he went or what happened after he left Bavaria. In 1959, his personal driver said in a sworn statement that Hans died around May 10th of 1945, but he didn't know how. Then in 1965, a personal aide of his said Hans died on May 7th of 45, with several witnesses who saw the body coming to the conclusion he had died of cyanide poisoning. And then again in 1969, a German officer who was a part of the V2 program claimed Hans made it to Prague, but was shot by one of his aides while defending a bunker that was being attacked by Czech fighters. Now, his wife did have his official date of death be marked as May 9th, 1945, so officially he is dead. And all that was done after she said his personal driver not only saw the body, but was present for the burial, but no body has ever been recovered. No one knows where he was buried, and there's no evidence. It's, again, this is the same driver who said, like, yeah, he died somewhere around this time, but as far as I know, he never claimed to see the body in his initial questioning. He just said, yeah, he died somewhere around this date. So all that is based on the word of one guy and how willing you are to believe him. But there's also the possibility of he ran off to another country. Maybe he's in Antarctica or Argentina or something. He died there. Maybe he actually got brought into the, NASA. Was it Operation Paperclip? Maybe he worked that under a false alias. No one knows, because no body was ever found. Evil German super soldiers is the theory that Germans try to make genetically enhanced, damn near unstoppable, and just really big soldiers. And it's just, there's a whole crazy conspiracy side of this one that goes into like sci-fi, the occult, and just, it quickly devolves into like the genetically enhanced stuff. Think like Captain America level things, or Red Skull, all the way to like, again, the crazy occult, like human sacrifices, selling souls, and that. But I kind of want to cover all the whole crazy occult stuff all at once later on in the Iceberg. But just think like Call of Duty Zombies, Wolfenstein, or the movie Overlord to run with the idea of super soldiers. The actual known documentation side of this thing is the Germans were developing a drug known as D9, which was basically meth and coke mixed together. And they tested this, and they were like, mixing these two very dangerous, very powerful narcotics together is great for our soldiers. And they were actually planning on mass producing it for German troops, because we all know that coke and meth have absolutely no downsides, and is 100% a genius idea to hop a bunch of soldiers up and get them addicted to these things, and then just throw them into a battlefield. Thankfully, at least for the sake of these people that were going to be forced on these drugs, the war ended before that could happen. And our last entry for Tier 2 is the theory that Germans fled to Antarctica, which is exactly how it sounds. Officially, Germany did send an expedition to Antarctica in December of '38, and their whole plan was to set up a whaling operation and increase German fat production. Unofficially, they sent a very large group of individuals there to build what's known as Bunker 211, to fall back to and reorganize, re-strategize, all that good stuff, come worst case scenario. It's theorized that not only were several high-ranking Germans whose bodies were never found or properly identified, including Mueller, Kimmler, and even Hitler, fled there, knowing they wouldn't be found due to not only the harsh conditions and difficulty of traversing and surviving the Arctic, but they also knew that most of their secret and highly speculated on projects like Die Glocke were going to be brought there too. Really, the only evidence for this is that the Nazis signed the Antarctica Treaty, which states that Antarctica is a neutral research zone and no country will bomb the continent. And their mindset with this was it was going to prevent anyone from conducting military operations in the region and finding them. Other evidence for this is the crew of a German U-boat that was picked up by the US and British officials in Argentina claimed to be part of a larger convoy, and the submarines that were in this convoy, one of which had Hitler on board, went to Antarctica instead of Argentina. There's also claims that Operation High Jump, a US Navy operation in the late 40s that officially was to test the Navy's capabilities and survival techniques in the Arctic in the worst case scenario of fighting Russia, was a massive cover-up for a real operation, which was to find the secret German Bunker 211. It's believed that this bunker is located in the ice-free mountain range in the section of Antarctica that Germany claimed during their initial whaling operation back in '38, but no one knows where it is. This also dives into the theories like Hollow Earth, Agartha, the occultism, religious artifacts, all of which, again, I'm like George R.R. Martin with dragons, guys. They're coming, okay? All that's going to be coming. But it should be known that Admiral Byrd, one of the commanding officers of High Jump, claimed he met the master of Agartha. After returning to the States, he was put into isolation, given a Medal of Honor, told to forget what he saw, which, that was really weird, but In his diary, Byrd also claimed the master said both the poles, Tibet, and the Pyramid of Giza all held entries to Agartha, but had no mention of the Germans. So it's believed that the reason we haven't found Bunker 211 is because it either just didn't exist, or instead of hiding out in a bunker, they actually were able to get into Agartha, or maybe the master saw how shitty all these people were and said, nah, y'all ain't coming in, fam, and just killed them all. I like to think it's that last one. Alright, and with that, we are going to end the video. Thank you all for watching and listening to my ramblings. If you liked it, hey, do the buttons, like, subscribe, dislike it. There will be a comment below somewhere that tells you how many dislikes this video has. I will keep that updated. Put a like on it. Subscribe if you're new. Bye. Love you. Hit me up on Twitter or something.